Backstabs. A massive and unavoidable point of contention with the community since its inception. Your attitude towards them is usually the deciding factor between loving and hating competitive multiplayer. Many of the jarring interactions with backstabs and latency were explained in Advanced PvP 101. If you didn't watch that video, go check it out before continuing. However, where that video faltered is addressing a common sentiment held by most of the community. Understanding how backstabs work do not make them any less cheap. Why should I be forced to play around something like this? That question is going to be the focus of this short video. Before I can get into the meat of the video, the first thing which must be addressed is why backstabs are used so much in the meta. This may seem obvious, but there are more complicated reasons than you may think. As a thought exercise, let's compare backstabs to their front-facing counterpart. The logical first reason why backstabs are so powerful is also the most simple: the damage. At meta level 125 or 135, where at or around 50 vitality is considered a minimum, the average backstab will do between 30 to 60% of your total health, depending on the weapon being used and if any damage multipliers are involved, such as the Hornet Ring, Red Tearstone Ring, or Power Within. However, if pure damage is exclusively what we're looking for, parrying would be more desirable, considering riposts do approximately 30% more damage on average than backstabs. Alright, so why aren't parries fished for as hard as backstabs? The next obvious answer is that it's because of the ease of execution. Riposts do significantly more damage, but it's also significantly more difficult to hard read your opponent's attack and then appropriately time a parry to get the extra damage. Not to mention the risks that are involved with rooting your character for the duration of the animation, potentially just to mistime your parry. The reason why backstabs tend to be used much more is a matter of risk versus reward. Despite the obvious advantages of the former, at least in concept, backstabs and parries are not totally dissimilar. At the heart of their application, they are both methods of punishment. Backstabs as a punishment for leaving your back exposed, and parries as a punishment for being too predictable. While it is debatable which of these two would be dominant if backstabs were nerfed to any extent, it is undeniable that backstabs have become superior because of their ease of execution and resulting flexibility, which can be applied in a multitude of scenarios due to their reliance on the player for execution and not the opponent. I believe this distinction between parries and backstabs is something that's important to note. Backstabs do not require your opponent to go on the offensive to be used, and are generally superior as they are a method of easily punishing players that are not mindful of their spacing or actions. Controversy begins to arise when backstabs are perceived as being overused well beyond what was intended by the developers. An important argument made by the community is that backstabs were never intended to be used as a primary form of engagement and only to be used as a punishment tool for misplaced attacks with long recovery times. Backstabs simply do too much damage for how often they are being used. However, I'd counter this by saying that despite backstabs occasionally doing excessive damage, they function in a way that is unintentionally balancing the game and encouraging players to play better. If you'd allow me, I'd like to compare Dark Souls with fighting games. For new players just getting into the game, I've heard backstabs be referred to as grabs. This isn't totally accurate. While it's partially true that you can use backstabs to, quote, throw someone who is blocking, it does too much damage and is too frequently used to be compared to something that's so narrow in its use case. I'd say that a more accurate comparison is that a backstab is more akin to a launcher and combo, both executed at once, and their ability to exploit a weakness for a very rewardingly large chunk of damage and allow for follow-up mind games. While there are true combos in standard weapon movesets and spells, there are too many issues with the current stun and recovery mechanics to commit to the small number of relatively slow true combos available. The presence of backstabs add an implied threat to sloppy and inconsistent play, which can prevent fights from stagnating. They act as a checks and balances system that would otherwise not be present, and their absence would subsequently lead to more degenerate meta strategies to emerge. Passive and defensive play in Dark Souls is strong. Really strong. I would say that without the existence of backstabs, there would be almost no way to pressure your opponent while they are defending. Instant invincibility frames at the touch of a button, combined with the almost complete nullification of any amount of meaningful damage from the front, makes engaging opponents unsatisfying at best and mind-numbingly frustrating at worst. Without a mechanic like Backstabs, if your opponent does not want to take damage, they will very easily not take damage. With the fear of taking the damage of a backstab present, players are encouraged to be mindful of their spacing, frequency of attacks, attack length, orientation, aggression, passiveness, and so on. It promotes good play, learning how to control your aggression, and developing good habits, because if you don't, you simply die. There's a fantastic article written by Sirlin that's a sort of TLDR of his book, both of which are titled Playing to Win. The book and article tackle multiple topics that I've touched on, but in much greater detail. I highly recommend you give the article or the book a read. The following is an excerpt from the article. A scrub is not just a bad player. Everyone needs time to learn a game and get to the point where they know what they're doing. The scrub mentality is to be so shackled by self-imposed handicaps as to never have any hope of being truly good at a game. You can practice forever, but if you can't get over these common hang-ups, in a sense, you've lost before you've even started. I've been playing Dark Souls since 2013, and all through its ups and downs, I've thoroughly enjoyed both the game and the community surrounding it. It really is something that the game was able to spring up a competitive scene completely on its own, with no intention or assistance from the developers. In fact, if anything is to be gathered from the past year, it's in spite of the developers that a consistent group of players continued to cultivate a competitive scene by streaming, creating content, further discovering new techniques, and just having fun in general. All throughout that time, the broader community has struggled with scrub mentality in one form or another. Whether it be honor, etiquette, unintended glitches, or any other generic self-imposed nonsense that's been pushed to either justify one's own losses through ignorance or inability to learn how to play. If you simply wish to have fun with the game and believe that playing in this particular way is just not for you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It becomes problematic when such a mentality is pushed upon people who are simply trying to enjoy themselves and play to the best of their abilities within the constraints of the game. I'll end on one final excerpt from the aforementioned article. If you play in such a way as to maximize your chances of winning, it means abusing everything quote-unquote cheap that you can. It means frustrating the opponent, abusing bugs, and anything else that you can think of that's legal to do. When all this comes together, it gives you a deeper kind of fun than is possible at lower skill levels. It's also totally fine to mess around with no intentions of ever really becoming good. You don't have to try to be the best at every game that you play. I certainly don't try that. That would be exhausting. But when I see someone else trying to be the best, I admire it rather than condemn it. If that makes the game fall apart, I hold the game developers responsible, not the player. Thank you for watching.